Hello, everyone. We're getting ready to start Lace. Love Applied Can Endure. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes to those in different time zones to have a chance to get on. And we will be starting in about 2 minutes. Okay, it is time for us to get started. And so we're going to get started. And again, this is Lace, Love Applied Can Endure. We're studying winning battles with love and what love does. And this is coming from my book, Winning Battles with Love, and you can find it on Barnes and Noble. If you want to get more about what's happening with love and what it does, you can purchase my book. We're not going to cover the whole thing in this session, but we are going to cover enough of it so that you can understand how to practically apply love and the benefits thereof. So this is Lace, Love Applied Can Endure. We're talking about winning battles with love. As always, if you want to reach me, you can write me at Dr. C.V. White, LLC, 150 Post Office Road, Suite 1027 in Waldorf, Maryland, 20604. Or you can email me at Dr. C.V. White, drcvwhite at gmail.com, or you can visit my website at cvwhite.com. And we would be happy to accommodate you and answer any questions that you have concerning what we cover when we go through our video club, which is what we're doing on tonight. So we're talking about love, and we did say in the secular definition that many of us have not heard the definition of love from our parents or whoever raised us. And we talked about the definition that's in the dictionary. And we also talked about the definition that God is talking about, the unconditional love that he's talking about. And the Bible explains 4 different kinds of love, but it's the unconditional love that we're talking about that never fails. It's that love that does something for us that we can imagine what it is. And so we know that the origin of love is God. It is an attribute of God. And so when we practice it, we are demonstrating an attribute of God, and people can see that for what it is. Now, we did go through a detailed explanation of what love was in terms of what we're talking about. And we did go through another person, Daniel, before we started with Joseph. And we went through Daniel and we talked about what love did for Daniel, and it was fascinating what happened with him and for him over his whole lifetime because of the way he loved. And so we're going to continue with Joseph on tonight. We had already talked about Joseph, and we talked about last week, we talked about what love did for Joseph, and we went through some of those, and we're finishing up those on tonight. So let's just review the first part that we went through last week of the benefits, what love did for Joseph. The first one was that Pharaoh declares that there was none wiser than Joseph. And so now he gets credit. He gets credit for his wisdom. He gets credit for his gifts. He was used and misused and abused by his brothers, and he was used by everybody else, but he didn't get credit. He wasn't paid for it. And then Pharaoh sets him over his whole house, which means he now has his own house to take care of, because Pharaoh does take care of him. But he was sent to Pharaoh as a slave, and now Pharaoh has put him over all of his personal house, of his personal abide where he lives. And then Pharaoh declares, number 3, Pharaoh declares that there should be no one greater than him. And so he is sitting a second to Pharaoh. And so that was one of the great benefits that he had. And number 4 was, he says, my people shall be ruled according to your word. So no one was able to override Joseph's word. And if they got jealous or anything else and they had any problems with Joseph, they weren't going to get to override him. They want to get to go around him. And so that was, Pharaoh set that up in the beginning. And then number 5, only in the matters of the throne will he be greater. Will I be greater than you, is what Pharaoh told him. So I'm going to even obey what you put out there. So no one is going to be able to use me to do anything different than what you say in regards to the work that I put to your hands. Number 6, that Pharaoh set him over all the land of Egypt. And that was really fascinating, because that's what he had been doing. That's what he had been doing. He was put over his father's business, and he was put over his the slaveholders' business. He was put over Potiphar's business. And then when Potiphar put him in jail, he was put over the whole jail system and the people. So he was managing people, and he was managing businesses, and he was just taking care of overseeing all of these things before he got to where he had to do this for Pharaoh. So he had to practice. He got plenty of practice so that he could become an expert at what he did. And then Pharaoh dressed him in fine clothes. So now he has kingly clothes that he can wear. And number 8, Pharaoh put a gold chain around his neck. So now he has that. Plus, we remember that his father gave him the coat of many colors. So even his father recognized that he should be appreciated for what he had brought to the table. Number 9, Pharaoh put a ring on his finger, which was a signet ring. And it was the ring that indicated that this was Pharaoh's signature. So because he was over so much land and so many people, when he sent out a message, he would use the ring and put the ring imprint on it, so people would know that it was him, and that would be understanding that they had to obey the king, because this was the king's. So he gave that ring to Joseph so that he could put that on any directions he had given out to anybody, any instructions he was giving out, anything he was telling anybody that he wanted them to do. He was to use that ring the same as Pharaoh did. And Pharaoh didn't get another ring. He gave that one to Joseph for Joseph to use during that period of time. And then he put him in the second chariot behind him so that people could see that he had that honor. So Joseph was honored, and he was honored in a way that he had never been honored since his brothers tried to kill him and sold him into slavery. And then everyone had to bow the knee to the king, so they ended up bowing the knee to Joseph as well. And number 12, Pharaoh said, without you, no man shall lift a hand or foot in all of Egypt. So everybody needed Joseph's permission to do anything. So that was a blessing for him. And number 13, he sent him throughout all the land of Egypt to be able to store up the food while they were in the 7 years of plenty, and get ready for the coming 7 years of famine. So that's what Joseph was doing. That's what he did in that particular time. So now we come to the second part. We wanted to finish up what what love did for Joseph, because we couldn't finish that on last week. It was just too much to cover. But we are going to cover the rest of it on this week. So now we're getting started with this, and I'm going to read this slide, and then we'll start to flow with what we want to cover this week, because we want to finish with Joseph this week and move on to our next subject for next week. So in addition to all that Pharaoh had done, he gave him a wife now. Now he has he no longer has to deal with loneliness or being alone. Finally, he can have a family again. But there was still something missing. He wanted to see his father and his brothers, and for them to love him. Nothing was mentioned about this, but anybody who has family that they love can say that they do not want to be abruptly separated and never know again if they're living or if they're dead. Still, he loved them as he always did. So now we did 13 last week of the blessings of what love did for Joseph. This is number 14. This is number 14. Joseph gets a family. He gets a wife, and with that wife, he has 2 children. And so now he has company. He's not alone anymore. He has someone to talk to, someone to love him, and someone to give back to him physically some of the love that he had been sharing all of these years and getting no return from it. They were just using him, those that used him, and they got rid of him, those that were jealous and envied him. So we see finally the time has come for Joseph to get the desire of his heart, and that is to see his family again because of the famine that was over all the land as described in Genesis 41, 56 through 57. And the famine was over all the face of the earth. And Joseph opened all of the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians. And the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. And all the countries came to Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all the land. Joseph's family had to come and buy corn. And we can see that what happened in Genesis 42, verse 1 through 5. So this is amazing here. This is really amazing, because can you imagine? Now we see here, can you imagine Joseph being chosen to make sure that the entire known world was fed during a time of famine? Not only was his family saved from that famine, but all of the countries around it, even Egypt, they came to Egypt to buy corn because they knew that the food was there, because Joseph had stored it up for the hard times. Now we see in Genesis chapter 41 where it talks about the famine, and it talks about what was happening and how he took care of it and how he stored up all of the food for during the years of plenty, so that when we got to the famine, we would understand that. And then in Genesis 42, it talks about Joseph being able to send for his father, and when his father sent his brothers down to Egypt to buy corn, to buy food. So, it's just amazing. It's amazing what God is doing with us and what he's doing for us. And when we think about this, what God has chosen us to do is important as well. It may not be something that we think that's very important. It may not be that at all. It might be just writing a poem, or it might be some revelation that God has given you, or it might be that you are to train people and prepare people. It might be that you would invent something or do something special that would have a great impact, whereas you don't think much of it. The people that are receiving it think a lot of it. Or it may be that you just paint a picture if you're an artist of some kind, or if you're in media of some kind, or even the performing art, or something maybe simple that people don't pay any attention to, as raising a child, as Mary and Joseph did. They raised the Lord Jesus Christ. They raised Jesus the Christ. And that was a very, very important job. And it had to be done correctly. And it was something that they went through their process to be able to do. So we know that when we're talking about Joseph's family coming to buy corn, it is the beginning of him realizing that his dreams are coming true. And I can't imagine that he thought about it at first, but I'm sure that over the over a period of time, he was beginning to understand what that dream was, because God didn't give him any more information except what we read in the scripture about him being over them, him being over his brothers, and him being over his father and his mother. And so let's look at this next slide and see what we have here. Joseph winning battles with love. In Genesis 42, verse 1 through 5. Now when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his sons, why do you look one upon another? And he said, behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither and buy for us for thence, that we may live and not die. And Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy corn in Egypt. But Benjamin, Joseph's brothers, Jacob sent not with his brethren, for he said, lest peradventure mischief befall him. And the sons of Israel came to buy corn among those that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. So the famine was in all the land, not just Canaan, but all the countries the famine was in. And like I said before, the Bible explains real clearly what Jacob was doing. And Jacob sent them down there to buy the corn so they would not die. And he knew that they would be able to live if they would bring the corn back. So, but he did not send Benjamin. He was afraid to lose Benjamin because he had already lost Joseph. And of course, he thought Joseph was dead. He thought Joseph was dead. So let's go into our next slide. So we're looking at that right now. And this is what we have here. God is so amazing. He knew all the time that Joseph would see his family again. Not only see them again, but God wanted Joseph to feed them and bring them into the land where he intended to grow the entire nation into a massive amount of people. When Joseph saw them, he decided to test them. He had been through too much with them. He had loved them through all of this, but he did not trust them. And when Joseph saw them, he recognized them, but they did not recognize him. The account of this is found in Genesis chapter 42, and part of the test is found in Genesis 42:18 through 28, which I am going to read to you. And when the test was over, Joseph revealed himself to his brethren, and this is what happened in Genesis 45, verse 1 through 4. But first I'm going to read in Genesis 42, verse 18 through 28, so we can get some idea of what was going on at that particular time. On the third day, Joseph said to them, Do this, and you will live. For I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison while the rest of you go to take grain back to your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified and that you may not die. This they proceeded to do. They said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he was pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give according to his blood. They did not realize that Joseph could understand them, since he was using an interpreter. He turned from them and began to weep, but then came back and spoke to them again, and had Simeon taken from them and bound him before their eyes. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain and put each man's silver back into his sack and give them provision for the journey. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain and the donkeys, and they left. At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened the sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw the silver in the mouth of the sack. My silver has been returned. And he said to his brothers, here it is in my sack. And their hearts sank, and they turned to each other, trembling, and said, what is this that God has done to us? So, they think that they're dealing with their harvest from the seeds that they planted when they wouldn't listen to his brother, when Joseph pleaded for his life with them. He was pleading for his life, and they would not listen to him. They wouldn't listen to him at all. And so now they're thinking that what they did was causing them a lot of problems. And so they were not pleased with themselves. They were unhappy with themselves. But Joseph was not angry with them, and he was not planning and did not treat them badly. So this is even more amazing to me, because look what happened. Joseph was so happy to see his family, he wept, and he did not care who heard him. He loved them, and to see them again was such a blessing to him. But their response was different. And like I just said, they were afraid. They knew what they had done. They knew they wanted to kill him. They knew they sold him in slavery. They knew that they didn't listen when he begged them for his life. And so they were afraid of Joseph. But as we see in Genesis 45, verses 5 through 8 here, it says, now therefore, and Joseph is talking to them, now therefore be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that you sold me hither, for God did not send me before you to preserve life. God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years has famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall be neither earning or harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve your prosperity in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now, if it were not you, it was not you that sent me hither, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord to all his house and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. So, wow. So now we're still counting the blessings that Joseph received because he loved. And 14 was him getting his family back, his father and his brothers, but 15 was that he was able to understand that God chose him to make sure that all of the people on the earth were fed during a famine. And he was able to understand that's what the dream was about. He was able to understand that. And so that was so important. That was so important to him. And, after Joseph had sent his sons to Egypt, number 16 was that he was going to see his family again. And, we're going through all of these, and there's 24 of them that we're going to go through and just see how important Joseph's life was to him, how important it was, his loving people was to him. And so number 16 was he was to see his family again. And then number 17, he was a father to Pharaoh. Can you imagine him being a father to the king? And he yielded to him as a father and treated him as a father, and he would not let anybody override his word or his work. Number 18, he was Lord over Pharaoh's house. So even Pharaoh's personal house and his personal being and his anything that was his family, Joseph was over that. And number 19, he was ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. And so that was so interesting, that Joseph was getting these many blessings because he loved. And that was just really fascinating. So let me just go over Genesis 45, verse 1 through 7. I'm going to read that from the NIV, so that we can just get a better understanding of what was happening here. Because remember, in the previous chapter 42, when they were talking about Joseph was testing them, and they were talking about being punished by God for what they did to Joseph and ignoring him when he begged them for his life. They didn't know that Joseph was speaking Egyptian through an interpreter. They didn't know that Joseph could hear them. And so now, and Joseph turned and he wept before them. And this whole process of the test, we are not going to go through all of that, but the whole process of the test was Joseph gave them the food and he put money in their bag so that he could accuse them to see if they were still of a mindset that they had before when they sold him, so he would know how to handle them. And so they went back to their father. And when they came back from their father, when all that grain was gone, and you can go and read this again for yourself, because we're not going to be able to read all that on tonight. Jacob sent them back for more. And when Joseph found that they had he accused them because they had the silver, the money that they paid for it. Joseph put it back into their bag, and then he accused them. He kept Simeon and sent them back until they brought Benjamin, his brother, back. So when they did all that, and Joseph could no longer take it, he had them eating in his house and everything. He broke down, and he could no longer control himself. He told them who he was, because they did not recognize him, but he recognized them. So that's what I am reading now in chapter 45, verse 1 through 7. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified of his presence. Wow. And I'm just at verse 3 now. Now they're terrified because they remember what they did. They know what they did, but they didn't know that Joseph loved them and that he didn't feel about them the way they felt about him. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." And when they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save the lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing or reaping. But God sent me here ahead of you to preserve you for a remnant on the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance." Now he's talking about saving their lives by a great deliverance. He knows now that his brothers didn't send him, that God sent him. God sent him now because he knows now that he is the person that God chose for the whole known world to be able to eat food during a year of famine. And so it wasn't just Egypt. All of the countries around were having a famine, including Canaan, where they were living. And so Joseph had no idea that God had such a great, great assignment for him, to be able to feed the whole known world. And so we understand how he had to be trained properly. We understand how he had to oversee his father's house so he would get that well. And he had to oversee Potiphar's house, and so he would improve on that. And he had to oversee the jail. So now, when he finished all of that, he was able to collect all that corn, all of that food, store all of that food up, not only for Egypt to eat for 7 years, but the whole known world. What an assignment to have, and what an assignment. How important. Can you imagine how important that must have been? You know, and like I said before, when we first started this session, how, what has God chosen us to do? All of us to do. You and me, what has God chosen us to do? So when we think about that, what is it that's special about that? We talked about that earlier. Is it some great revelation that God has given somebody that's going to save, a lot of people? Or is it just to raise a child like Mary and Joseph did? Or like the mother of the 12 apostles did? Or like the mothers of the 12 patriots of Jacob's son? What was it, that God gave to us that's going to cause some great thing in the earth to happen? And we don't think it's that important because we don't know the significance of whatever it is God has caused us to do. Because Joseph didn't know. Joseph didn't know. Jacob didn't know. His brothers didn't know. So it's very important that we understand what's going on with this. And so far, we have seen that because Joseph loved the way he did, we're up to 19 of these 24 blessings. We're up to 19 of these 24 things that Joseph did and that Joseph received because he loved. That is amazing to me. When you think about your life and when I think about my life, what is it that God has done? Maybe you are maybe it was a child that you raised, or maybe it was somebody that you talked to, or maybe it was a class that you taught, or maybe it was a book that you wrote. Something happened in your lifetime that God really needed to be done. And when you did it, it caused some great things to happen in the earth. And it's amazing to me how we don't think that people do any great things except the people that we know. We see in the Bible, we see that Joseph did a great thing. We saw Moses did a great thing. We saw the 12 apostles did a great thing. We look at all of the prophets in the Old Testament, They did some great things. We look at David, he did some great things, but they were just ordinary people. They were just ordinary people. And there were so many other people that we just didn't understand that how important their assignment was. How important their assignment was. You know, for in the Judges period. In the Judges period, when we had judges in the Old Testament, and we look at people like Deborah, you know, where women were not permitted to hardly do anything, but Deborah was a judge. So there is possible for us to understand that God can do anything, no matter what we're thinking about it, no matter what we think, how small we think that is. God can do anything. He can do absolutely anything. So we see here in this slide that we're looking at now, that it was just amazing. It was amazing to me to look at what Joseph went through, all of that time, and all of the blessings that flowed on his life for his entire life after he got through that process. That's amazing. And so look what happened to Joseph. He was so happy to see his family. He wept, and he did not care who heard him. He loved them, and to see them again was such a blessing to him. But his response was different than theirs, you know. So as I had already read, but this is in a different version, I'm going to read this again because it's important for us to understand what happened here. And Genesis 45, verse 5 through 8, I'm only going to read that part. Now, therefore, be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that you sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. Now Joseph knows it wasn't his brothers that sold him. Now he knows that God sent him there. God sent him there not only to save his brothers and his family, but the whole known world. All of those countries were experiencing that famine. And so God sent him there to prepare and to store up the food so that everybody could live during the famine. And you know, I imagine a lot of people may have died because they may not have been able to make it to Egypt, or they may not have been even known that there was food in Egypt. But it does talk about if you didn't get this food out of Egypt, you might die. And so Jacob knew that. Jacob knew that. And Jacob knew that. And he knew that. And he because he knew that, he sent them down to get some food so that they would live and not die. So verse 6 says, for these 2 years has the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall neither be any earning or harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve your prosperity in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Now, we want to remember that because I've read this side before. I'm reading it again because this is the most important one here. He says he sent me to save your lives by a great deliverance. What was this great deliverance that he's talking about? He's talking about they are delivered from starving to death because God prepared the land and he stored up the food so that they could be delivered. And not only are they, deliverance is not just the food, but we're going to see how they're delivered. It's just amazing. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. In verse 8, so now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. He hath made me a father to Pharaoh, which is one of the blessings, and Lord of all his house, which is another one of the blessings, and ruler throughout all the land of Egypt, which is another one of the blessings. So now we're up to the suffering that he did by a great deliverance. We're going to be talking about that, on our very last slide. But we're going to go ahead and finish this. We're going to come back to that great deliverance because we want to remember that. We want to remember that before we finish up on tonight. Okay, so this one is Joseph is now doing, this slide is talking about the dreams. Joseph is now doing what God intended for him to do when he gave him the dream. The only thing left for him to do is to send for his father and all the rest of his family members. Joseph explained to them what was happening with the famine and what he was going to do for them, and then sent them back to get the rest of the family. And we see what happens with that in Genesis 45, 9 through 15. So I'm not going to read that, but I encourage you to go back and start reading at chapter 40 and read through the whole, all of these chapters to understand what happened here and how big the blessing was and how big were the items that Joseph received because he loved. This is a true testimony of the love of God. And when you tap into the love of God, you tap into winning every time. Pharaoh's servants passed this news report to Joseph's family, to Pharaoh, and it pleased Pharaoh and his servants. Then in Genesis 45, 17 and 18, it reads, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, say unto thy brethren, this do ye, lade your beasts and go get you unto the land of Canaan, and take your father and your household, and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land. Okay, so now we're up to number 20. He says, go get your father and your brother. So, Joseph couldn't just move around because he wanted to, because he came to Egypt as a slave. So Pharaoh told him, go. He told him to go and get your brothers. He didn't go. He sent someone. He sent to get them. He did not go. He did not leave, but he did send for his father and his brothers. So that was number 20. He was able to send for his family. And then he was able to bring them to Egypt. He was able to bring them to Egypt. And he could not bring them without Pharaoh's permission. So Pharaoh said, bring them. And so that was number 21. And then Pharaoh says, I will give you the good of the land. And that was in Goshen. Goshen was the richest farming land in all of Egypt. There was no land more richer and more amenable for growing food and vegetables and fruit as Goshen. And so he gave him Goshen for his family, the best land in Egypt. And that was number 22. And then he says, and you shall eat of the fat of the land and your family too. So in number 23, actually that's 25, he should eat of the fat of the land for him and his family, but he'll have his own house, which he did, and he didn't have to worry about that. He worked for Potiphar, he worked for the jail, and he was even working with his father, which he didn't get his inheritance because his brothers called himself cheating him out of that. But now he is getting paid. He is getting the best in the Egypt. He is getting his own house. He's getting the food of the land. And so now we're up to 24 for himself, and 23 for himself, and 24 for his family too. So he brings them down, and he's able to put them in Goshen, the best land in Egypt. And number 25, Pharaoh paid for it all. He didn't have to worry about his stipend, what was given to him to take care of his family, his wife and his 2 children. He didn't have to worry about that. Pharaoh paid for it all. So we see 25 things that he benefited from because he loved and because he chose to love. Because love is a choice. We talked about that. Love is a choice. Because he chose to love, we see 25 things that he has done, that blessed his life. We see 25 things. So, both of these dreams had come true. When he tested his brothers and had them going back and forth the way they did, and really scared because they had to leave Simeon in Egypt when they went back. So Simeon stayed I mean, he stayed there in prison until they ran out of food and had to come back and get some more. And it was just amazing of how he tested them, and he saw that they had repented, and he just went ahead and introduced himself again to them and gave them the best of the land. And even when you read this story, when you finish reading it, you will see that they didn't believe it even at first. Every time they had to deal with Joseph, they thought he was going to do something to them, but he never did. He never did anything to them. But they thought that he was going to. They thought he was going to do something. Uh, and it's just amazing how their conscience kept whipping them, even though Joseph told them that it wasn't them, that it was God that had sent him to where he was, and it wasn't them. So he was just amazed at what God had done. But keep in mind, Joseph didn't know what God had done until the very end. He didn't know what God had done until the very end. So now that Joseph has realized that both of the dreams had come to pass, his parents and his brothers had bowed down to him. Joseph did not get the big head about this. He reverenced and honored God, and he was thankful that his family would be able to have good land, and they shall be able to eat the fat of the land at no cost to them. Why did that happen? Because Joseph fought the battles with love, and he won. He won. Joseph paid the price. In some respects, he paid the price for them, similar to what some of the things that Jesus Christ paid for us, because Jesus loved us so much. And one of those characteristics that Jesus paid the price for, Joseph also experienced, and that's found in Isaiah 53:3. In the NIV, it says, and he was despised and rejected by mankind. So we know that Joseph was despised and rejected by his brothers and his family. And so that's what happened to Jesus. He was despised and rejected by the religious order that God had left in the earth all of these years. That order that was carrying on the temple, that was doing the sacrificing for the people, that had the priests and the high priest, all of them despised, and that would be his family, because Jesus said, those that obey his father, those are his brothers, his sisters, and his mother, and those that obey his father, and those are the ones that love him. So they were his family, and they despised and rejected him. And so he was a man of suffering and familiar with pain. And so was Joseph, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. And, like one of whom people hid their faces, he was despised and he was held in low esteem. That happened to Joseph from the time he was sold. From the time his brothers despised him and would not speak peaceably to him, through the time of him being called into Egypt to interpret Pharaoh's dream. So it's very important, that we understand that both of these dreams came true, but Joseph didn't get any details. He had no idea of how important that job that he was given to do was. But he fought the battles with love, and he won. When we think about the Israelites, we know that God told Abraham that they were going to be in slavery for 400 years. He didn't tell Abraham of where they were going to be in slavery and who was going to do it. He didn't say Pharaoh was going to do it, but he told them that they were going to be in slavery for 400 years. He told Abraham. And so we know that was going to happen with them. And but we know that they were not put in slavery as long as Joseph and his brothers were alive. We know that happened. Joseph lived 110 years before he died. And that's recorded in Genesis as well. But Levi was the last of his brothers that died. And Levi lived 137 years. So Joseph won all of those battles that he was fighting all of those years with love. Um, and we have covered just 24 or 25 of the items that demonstrated what love did for Joseph. And we cannot even, I don't think that we even pay attention to what love does for us. I don't think we even pay attention to that. We know that God loves us. We know that he's been taking care of us. We know that he's done things. But I don't think we pay attention to it the way we should, because it all seems so natural and small to us in terms of our lifespan, and our life journey. But whatever it was that we were supposed to do, and we're still supposed to do, it was very important to God. And somewhere in our bloodline and the bloodline of the body of Christ, it has a significant, very important assignment. And it's going to, we probably won't know what it is until we get to heaven if we're not paying attention. But it's going to be something that we just did not imagine. Now, God has been talking to us about these next 3 months, that he wants to do something miraculous in our life. And we're going to have to use our faith like we've never used before. But you know what? We have to really recognize that Joseph was using faith a lot. He was faithing out God. And in the end, he was able to understand that it was God that did all this. And it wasn't his brother. It wasn't his father. It wasn't anybody that was supposed to do anything else. God was positioning him to do this great work that he had to do. And so we're going to have to really use our faith and use our love and forgive people and just move in these next 3 months, so that we can receive the blessing that God has for us. The blessings, and so we want to just make sure that we understand this and that we're able to do this, because the Lord has already said, that he's done this. So now all we have to do is step into it. We have to step into it. And so I see you there, Inez. Are you there? Can you hear me, Inez?
Yes, I can hear you. I was just trying to do a larger platform so I can see the writing.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I'm going to just ask you, what did you learn tonight? And do you see yourself as important as God sees you, and as important as Joseph was? Do you see yourself like that?
Oh, what I learned tonight, what I heard?
Yes.
Well, what I heard and I learned about Joseph is that he showed love in spite of all that happened to him, and that God had put him in that space to elevate him so he could save his family, his father, and all the rest of the 11. I believe that's what it was. And that God needed him in that space. In order to do that, he used his brothers to get him to where he was by excelling him. And once he got there, he was put through a lot of things. But God still moved him forward. And he trusted God, and God believed in him, and God knew him, of course. And his life just went forward. And he was a smart person, because he acquired I think Potiphar, whatever the man's name was. He put him in charge of the famine and saving the people. And also I learned, for me, I feel that I am important. I used to didn't think so, but I think so now when I listen to that. All the things that I went through, God has a purpose for me and showing me that purpose. Whereas I thought I had given up on, I didn't want to actually do Sunday school anymore, but then they start calling on me to review the Sunday school, so I'm going to use that one. And then the Lord just opened a way for me to be able to review the lesson. And even though I'd be nervous, he still gave me the words and the right words to say to glorify him rather than and I think that God has has things, and so even though I'm way in my 70s, the Lord still has things for me to do. Because I used to think that, that I didn't start working, I wouldn't do anything, but God always has a way for us, and He has a plan for us, and we have to stop, listen, be quiet so we can hear what His plan is and follow His plan for us, His path. I think that's a lot of talking, but I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, that's good. That's what I want to hear, because I want us to get to where we understand that we're in a position to bring our family to a great deliverance, just like Joseph. We have family members that are going through stuff. We have family members that struggle with unforgiveness. We have family members that are not saved. And so we can bring our family into this great deliverance. And if we're able to bring one person out of it all, if we're able to get one person saved in the family, finance, all of heaven celebrates. That's how important one person is. Yeah, so we sort of look at that lightly and not understand how important that is for God. If all of heaven would celebrate because one person was saved, what do you think every time a person is delivered from something? If we're able to help our family members overcome addictions, and it doesn't have to be drugs, it could be food, it could be hurt, it could be sex, it could be anything. If we're able to help somebody understand how much God loved them and to come closer to Him and give Him opportunity to be Lord of their life, it just makes a difference. It's a big deal. It really is a big deal. And those of us that are operate as firstborns, or operate as the one who operates, that everybody calls to help. And I don't know if that's your testimony or not. Everybody call you when they want something.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're that kind of person. Everybody's gonna call you when they want something, but if you're able to respond, and if it's just comforting them, that is a great deliverance if they're able to move out of the devil's clutches and into the hands of God. That's a great deliverance. And so we don't, while we don't think much of it, it is something that's very important to the Lord for us to know that we are important like that. So I do appreciate your sharing that, because when we talk about Joseph, we always talk about his gift of storing up the food and how he stored it up and distributed it, and he bought all this land for in Egypt for Pharaoh and all of that. But we never talk about what he went through and how he loved his family and how he loved everybody through it, and the blessings that he got because of the way he loved and the way he handled it and the way he responded to the way he was being treated. And that is something that's really important for us to grab a hold of. It is. You have any other comments, Inez?
No, that was it.
Okay. Well, we are done for tonight. We will be talking next week. We will be talking about what happens when you refuse to love. So that's going to be very interesting, because we know we do that sometimes too.
Yes.
That's going to be very interesting. So that's what we were going to be talking about next week. What happens to those that refuse to love? What happens to them? We always are concerned about when people do things that they're getting away with stuff, but you don't get away with anything. Seed time and harvest is for everybody. Okay, so let me pray so we can close out. Our Father and our God, we just thank you for being who you are. We bless and praise you because you are God Almighty, everlasting, and eternal. And we thank you, God, for showing us how to love, and that there is benefit to love, that you have already set it in the earth. It's not something you're waiting to do. And if we do it, and then we will get the benefit and the results of it. And so we thank you, God, for those that are on tonight, those that would watch this on social media, those that would watch this on Facebook, and those that will watch it again on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. We just pray for them, and we ask you, God, to help us move according to your word. Let your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, as it concerns each one of us, that we would move into this place that you have called us to be, and that we will understand how important that is to you, so that we would not think that you just kick this to the side or whatever we do think about ourselves, that it is very important to you that we do what you sent us here to do. And we thank you for it, and we praise you for it. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, Inez, I will see you next week.
Okay. All right.
Okay, good night.
Good night.